Thank you, Alistair. Let's begin. Hello, everyone. Let me introduce myself first before I hand over to our guest speaker, Maha. I will be facilitating the session. Actually, Maha will do most of the things. So Alistair and I are just here to support for this topic too. So let me introduce myself. I'm Kritika Raghupati, an associate director and an academic developer at the National University of Singapore. So Alistair and I co-lead this topic too on open learning. So Alistair, hi. So for me, it's always been a pleasure, to come back to this ONL group, to this ONL community since I started as a participant way back in 2015, 2016. I cannot remember now. Yeah, so for today, the second webinar for this topic, or the second topic, a second webinar will also be held next week, where basically that webinar is designed to provide you a chance to meet with people from other groups. So we will try and facilitate it in a way that you have a chance to meet other PBL group members. So that'll be how we will do it. But I'm not going to go into details of that. We will move straight away into today's webinar. The focus for today's topic is openness in education, both from the educator's perspective as well as the learner's perspective. And when we thought about it, we couldn't think of a better person, a better practitioner and advocate for open education to guide us on this journey than Maha, right? So Maha Bali is Associate Professor of Practice in the Center for Learning and Teaching at the American University in Cairo. She's a passionate, open, and connected educator. Just now we were talking about, how we need to connect even more. So from her work on Equity Unbound, to her editorial work on a number of journals where she, including the key ones like Hybrid Pedagogy Journal, the Online Learning Journal, she's committed to openly sharing evidence-based practices that places learners first. Right? So Maha Bali's topic today is centered around exploring the nuances of open educational practices from a social justice perspective. Over to you, Maha.
Thank you, Kritika. Thank you, Alistair and Lotta. I always like to start my sessions with Assalamu alaikum, because whatever your time zone is, this is the Islamic reading of peace, and it works in the morning and the afternoon and for hi and for bye and for all purposes. And I realize we're all from different parts of the world. And so I'm here sharing my slides. Are they showing? Yes?
Yep, you're up there.
Great. And if you want to follow along and tweet, this is my Twitter, it's Bali_Maha. And I'm happy to have you tweet out my slides. The slides are on a Creative Commons by non-commercial license. This means you can reuse my slides, you can edit my slides and reuse them as long as you credit me and you don't sell them to anyone. But you can use them yourself in your workshops, in your classes, reuse parts of it, add your own in between. If you do that, I'd love to hear, but you don't have to take my permission to do that. And yeah, so before we go anywhere, I would like to know how you're feeling today. Type this for me in the chat. Let me know, give me a word or phrase to express how you're feeling right now. Since the pandemic began, I kind of feel like I always need to ask people how they're feeling, and it's ups and downs, and maybe things in the pandemic are slowing down and getting a little bit better, but I still want to know how you're feeling. So thankful and happy, Farzana. Thank you. Quite all right. I'm curious about those numbers before your names. Excited and curious, harassed and short in time. I feel that way a lot these days. Thankfully, you can go without mask in the open space now in Singapore. Okay. Good, Osman. Apologies if I pronounce anybody's name wrong at any point. Spring feelings. Spring is always good. Yeah. Short on time. Anything new? Yeah, exactly. Nothing new. Busy but good. One of the things I remember someone saying busy is not a feeling. When you say, how are you feeling? You're feeling busy? Optimistic. Trying to keep up with many things. Yes. Involved. Great and tired. Both great and tired. That's interesting, because you can get both, right? You can be both feeling good, but also happy that summer is approaching. Marwa. Okay. Stretch for time. Multitasking all day. My daughter this morning was like, why do you multitask? I'm like, but I can get things done. How else would things get done? Zoom meeting interspersed with I agree, Doreen, the combination of Zoom and in-person meetings is more exhausting than all Zoom or all in-person, because you have to switch modes all the time. Overwhelmed and inspired, both together. Busy but motivated. I like that. Okay, I'm going to move on. This is going to be an interactive session, so expect to use your chat a lot. All right, so these slides are available to you. You can take a look at the slides. Like I said, you can edit them or reuse them or whatever, and I've made them, hopefully it works, that they are, anyone can comment. So if you feel like following along over there, you can do that. If you want to come back to them later and put a comment for me, you can. If you want to share them on social media, that's also fine. And here's what I'm planning to do today. I'm planning to do a chatterfall to ask you a few questions and ask you to invite you to sort of answer in the chat. I'm going to share a cupcake story related to something my daughter experienced. And I've changed the order of these things and I've removed one. So don't worry too much about the agenda, but we're going to end with a reflective thing called the spiral journal, where you're going to need paper and pen or pencil. So it's not a requirement, but it's better if you do have a loose leaf paper and a pen. So I'm getting mine. I hope you have one nearby. If you don't, I'll just pause while we're doing it so you can go get one. Okay. So just to start off, what nourishes you lately? So what helps your well-being, helps you feel? Thank you, Alistair. I like my blog too. So what nourishes you lately? I'll put the question in the chat and invite people to answer that. Because I think a lot of us who are educators and all kinds of giving professions like parents and nurses or giving situation, okay, parenting is not a profession per se, although maybe in Scandinavian countries you get paid to parent, we don't. But yeah, a word of gratitude for something I've done that most take for granted. I love that, Doreen, thank you. Meeting friends and discussions with colleagues. Cecilia, yes, I think social, yeah, family, friend, garden, meeting new people, books and music, deep long chats with people, kid and baking. Yeah, baking nourishes me too. Both the creation of the stuff and the eating it later. New expectations and contacts, connections, dog. Yes, pets, definitely. Not wearing masks, okay. Food, engaged students, small wins along the way to bigger things. Bianca, I like that a lot. All right, what else? Taking walks. I am so in love with outdoors and sunshine in ways before the pandemic. I don't think I appreciated enough that I live in a country with a relatively good climate most of the time. Yeah, nature, definitely. Family, and to actually have time for fun things. Yes. Anytime we have. Teenagers' point of view, Denise, that is usually not very nourishing. So I'm interested in how that is nourishing for you, but I'm happy. Learning something new, yes, outdoors and swims, health, family, nature, cultural events, concerts, arts exhibitions, things that we couldn't do for a while there. Walking the dogs on the beach, yeah, that's amazing. I hope you have time now to do a lot of things that do nourish you, or that at least when you do have them, that you can stop and enjoy them. One of the things that's nourishing me lately, a lot of the things that you mentioned applies in my case, but the one I think that's nourishing me a lot these days is this book called Emergent Strategy by an author called Adrienne Marie Brown. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but this quote, building community is to the collective as spiritual practice as to the individual, is I think what kept me going during the pandemic, is that I have a huge community of little small communities of different kinds in my life that I built from the open web. So my open educational practice, which is kind of what we're going to be talking about today, is nourished by having connections with other people who have the same cares in the world. So we were caring about pedagogy of care during the pandemic. We care about social justice and equity in education. And having those communities have been what's nourishing me, and this book. And just yesterday I had a book club meeting with some people who are reading the same book, so that was also very nourishing. It's about finding people who have similar beliefs and having these connections and conversations with them. And I'm asking this question: why is openness important for you? And I know, like, maybe some of you are new to openness, but you've decided to take this course. So I'm curious, why is openness important for you? Let me know in the chat. You're still thinking about it. That's alrighty. That's totally fine. because of learning together, the opportunities to learn together. And it represents sharing with the community. Fairness, yes. Knowledge and skills should be freely available to everyone. Helps to close the equity gap. All right, I'm interested that a lot of it has spirit of globalization. Yeah, I agree. Open to new ideas and collaboration, stimulates thinking, real equality, access, copyleft, spark new ideas for inclusion and broadening perspective, opens the door. I like that a lot of your what you're saying is about both the connections and about the social justice aspect, like you're saying, equity and inclusion and these terms. So that's good. We're on a similar foundation here. Anyways, learning and growth, alternative perspective, and there's someone saying thinking about openness harder. Yeah, it takes a while, I think, to absorb what openness can do and is, and what fits with your own context. I think that's not something you can just switch on and off. It takes a while, and then you have to try it and see what kind of risks or challenges you face, and then decide what openness is going to mean to you, and that can evolve over time, I think. Equal access to knowledge, an alternative perspective. It requires trust. Katarzyna, yes. I used to have a friend, Polish friend called Katarzyna, so I hope I'm pronouncing your name right.
Yeah, that's correct. That's the right pronunciation.
All right, thank you. All right, I'm going to move on and share with you another quote from the same book, Emergent Strategy again. She wasn't writing about open education, but when she wrote this, it felt like it was about open education in my practice. And she's saying, are you actively practicing generosity and vulnerability? So those two together, both generosity and vulnerability, because generosity is when you give without strings or expectations attached. You give and you don't want the person who's giving back to you necessarily to reciprocate. But you're also making yourself vulnerable and showing your needs so that someone somewhere can respond to your needs. So this very last part, interdependence, is not about the equality of offers in real time. So meaning we know that we're not alone and that there are other people out there. And when I offer something to someone, I don't want them to reciprocate immediately. It's not like I give you money and you give me something in return, but you give openly. And at the same time, you expect the universe will bring it back to you somehow. And I think open education is a lot like that, that you offer your things for other people to use for free. And even though the person who uses your thing is not necessarily the person who's going to give you back, but someone somewhere will give you back. And that's been my experience. I don't know, those of you who have been in this space, if you have similar experiences, let us know a little bit about that in the chat. And if any of you have been recently working on an open project that you'd like to share about in the chat, feel free to do so. I am going to share one of mine. I'm going to put the link to it in the chat. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more as we move forward. And these are resources. This 1HE Equity Unbound thing is when in August 2020, when a lot of people in the Northern Hemisphere were going to start teaching fully online for the first time, we developed these resources to help people build community online. People didn't know how to start a course and build community fully online. Most people were not teaching online before the pandemic. So what was this about? And so we created demo videos and templates and adaptations for how you could do better in-class introductions, do better warm-up activities at the beginning of class, and how to do different activities to build community throughout a semester, and whether you want to do it synchronously, asynchronously. Do you have access to Zoom and breakout rooms or do you not? Alistair, yes, I think it's a lot of it is also a basis in religions, and very interestingly, she talks about that later. I agree that a lot of religions are like that as well. And this comes back to this community as a spiritual, community to the collective is like spirituality to the individual as well, I think. All right, so cupcake story. So my daughter helped me pick this picture this morning, and the story is about her. She is now 10 years old, but this happened when she was maybe 8.5. And so my daughter likes to create pictures on her phone and edits photos in with words and different graphics together. And she usually shares them with her friends on WhatsApp, okay? And so one day, my daughter was at her best friend's birthday party, and her best friend had cupcakes instead of a big cake. And my daughter said, I made those cupcakes. People looked at me thinking that I'd baked them. I'm like, no, I haven't baked them. I have no idea what my daughter's talking about. What does she mean she made the cupcakes? She was with me all morning. I know she didn't make the cupcakes. And my daughter comes and says, oh, well, actually, the cupcakes, you know, when you have cupcakes with a printed picture on top, like you can take a picture of a person and print them on the top of a cupcake. So the pictures that were printed on top were from this game called Among Us, but my daughter had edited them in particular ways, and her best friend took these from WhatsApp and put them on the cupcake. So how do you think my daughter felt when she had the pictures that she's created on someone else's cupcake, birthday cupcake? You can tell me in the chat, or you can unmute if you want. Celine, I don't know how to pronounce your name, sorry, says proud. And actually, my daughter's friend's called Celine, so it's very close to your name. Acknowledged and affirmed, Doreen, yeah. Others? Co-creator, proud of her work being shared. So let me tell you, you're all wrong. That is not how she felt. Did someone think she might have felt differently? Yes, Farzana, go ahead. Angry, Osman, scared. Farzana, what were you gonna say?
At first, I was thinking that because others didn't appreciate or didn't know that it was her doing,
Yes.
maybe she felt that she's like excluded or she's not appreciated enough because of that.
Yes. So I asked her recently, were you upset because they didn't take your permission, or were you upset because you weren't acknowledged? Like, would it have been okay if they took your permission, or would it have been okay if they acknowledged? And she said, they didn't have to take my permission before they used it, but I would have liked to be acknowledged as the person who did that. And her friend had not done that. And I've always told her since then, put your name on the graphic. Your friends are not good at editing, so they won't be able to remove your name. You know, like painters have their names on their paintings, right? And so, yes, so the thing is here is, I think what's important about people who share is that we need to understand when they share something, what is their emotional connection to the thing that they share, and to what level do we need to get permission? Do we need to acknowledge? Can we edit it? Can we reuse it? And all of that. This is something that people who share, we know that the default is everything is copyrighted, right? Any kind of intellectual property that's in a tangible form is copyrighted, but someone can be willing to share it. You just need to know to what level they're planning to share it. So in this sense, my daughter was willing to share it. She doesn't want to be compensated. She doesn't want money for the cupcake design. That's not what she's doing, although maybe someday she will if she becomes like a graphic designer, right? But she just wants people to know that it's hers. That's all she wanted. And they weren't doing that for her. So it hurts. And I thought at first she'd be proud, but she wasn't. She was trying to let people know this is mine, and nobody was acknowledging that. So it's just something to keep in mind as we think about openness and the kind of emotional connections people have to the work that they do. It's not just about, you know, more than just needing permission. She didn't need them to get her permission, but she was still wanted to know how her work was going to be used and to be acknowledged for that. And Catherine Cronin, who resides in Ireland, says that openness is contextual, personal, and continually negotiated. So we can't assume the way we perceive openness is the same as how someone else perceives it. Even ourselves, in one context, we have a different connection to our work than in another context. So as a PhD student, my connection to my thesis was something. My connection to the work I do in my institution is different than my connection to my blog that I do with myself. And continually negotiate. We can change our minds about these things over time after certain incidents happen. So I've had work of mine reused without acknowledgement in different ways. So yeah, these things change. I know there's a few people here who have Arabic names, so I don't know if you can read this, but Taha Hussein, who is an Egyptian author and educator, and I think he was a minister of education, used to say, "Al-ilmu kal-ma'i wal-hawa," so knowledge is like water and air. And what does this make you think about? In what ways is knowledge like water and air? What do you think he meant by that? And I'm just like imagining, because I don't know the rest of the text yet. This is a very well-known thing he said. One of them is that it's free. I don't know what you mean, Milika or Melissa, that's fluent. Doesn't belong to any one person, Melissa, yes. It's necessary for life, yes, Doreen. Dynamic, I love that. And I don't know how to say your name, but yes, dynamic, I love that. Inshallah, flowing, changing, yes, like YouTube, TikTok, on the spirit of sharing. Ubiquitous, I love that as well. Hard to package and keep, I like that. Katarzyna, it's for everybody, yes. Transparent, yes. Yes, I love all of these. I love all of these. And I think that I've always thought that Open education, especially recyclable. I really like that, Philip. Recyclable, that we can reuse it. I love that. So in what ways is open education like water? And, I haven't yet defined what open educational practices are, but just doing education in the open, in whatever way you perceive it to be. How does that help it make it more like water? Collective and individual. I like that, Lata. Should be freely available to anyone. Yeah. So in reality, actually, water and air aren't really freely available in the sense that they should be, but they're not really. Like people who live in very crowded areas and polluted areas don't get the same quality of air as people who live in better places. And we pay for the water we use, right? It's not really free. So, and again, water is polluted in some places and not others. So in Egypt, for example, in Cairo, the water is not drinkable, but in other parts of Cairo, you can drink directly from the River Nile. Flexible, Sergey, I love that. And a right for everyone, Marwa, yes, it's a right for everyone. Whether or not we're gonna have to pay for it, whether or not it's equal, it's something that air hasn't been privatized, that's true. But to get clean air, you need to be living in a place that is privileged enough to have that clean air. So if you live in very crowded areas over here, you don't get very good air. Maybe a luxury for some, inshallah, yeah, I agree. And so open education shouldn't be a luxury, but some people won't be able to reach it if they don't have, if we create our open materials on the internet and they don't have access to the internet. I hope that the animated GIF is not annoying you, because this one's a little bit more annoying. Like the other one is more relaxing from the previous one. I think I'm going to stop using this one in the future. They both fill space in the sun. They take the form of their container. I love this, Damien. I agree. And someone else said vital, which is great. And in need of distribution, Swati, I love this, because just by creating something and making it available doesn't mean that it's going to be distributed. You need to be very intentional about how you distribute it. This is great. I love everything that you all have contributed so far. So open educational practices, I'm just going to go through this quickly so that we can get into the more details. So Suzanne Koscioglu and I talk about openness as an attitude or a worldview beyond the technical definitions of what openness is, such as open access and things like that. But there are characteristics of humans that are open selves. So a person who's editable, willing to change their opinion about something, narrating your practice so that you don't just share the complete end product of what you do. This is a picture of Suzanne and me, by the way, at the corner over there. Narrating practice shows sharing the processes of how you arrive at your final product. A lot of academia and education is about sharing the end product, making ourselves vulnerable sometimes, asking questions or showing things that are not complete yet, and negotiation of knowledge and not just sharing polished products, all right? And we also thought, we originally called this the self as OER, where OER is an open educational resource, but we think maybe it's the open self, and that there's also the communities and connections. It's not just about being an individual, being open, but being individual in a social space. So Catherine Cronin defines open educational practices as anything that relates to either creating, using, and reusing open educational resources. So materials like books, making them open and allowing other people to reuse them, or you yourself curating open materials from others and creating your own book or your own website or something like that, as well as any open pedagogies like sharing teaching practices openly on a blog or on Twitter or connecting on Facebook or any of those spaces. And others like Instagram and TikTok and all of that. Someone mentioned some of these earlier. Other people like Cheryl Hodgkinson Williams and Henry Trotter, who were working at the University of Cape Town at the time, were talking about any practices that undergird the creation of open educational resources, right? This can be creation or curation or circulation or any of those, such that other people can be encouraged to copy and not need permission to do that. So that's one way, but it sort of focuses on the creation of open educational resources, which I think is a narrower definition. And then Robin DeRosa and Rajiv Jangiani from the US and Canada talk about access. A lot of you talked about access, so access-oriented commitments. And here they mention learner-driven, that you empower students as well to take part in creating knowledge, right? It's not about giving students knowledge, but helping them be part of the knowledge creation process. And Sarah Lambert in Australia is very social justice oriented, and she feels like open education is not just about developing free digitally enabled materials. And honestly, I don't think the focus on digital is necessary. I think something can be open and not necessarily be originally digital. But anyway, let's keep that. That's her definition. And she's talking about digital learning materials and experiences. So an experience like what we're having right now could be open. It's an experience, it's not a material. I mean, I guess there's a video at the end and there's slides and whatever, but the experience itself in the conversation. And then doing it primarily for the benefit and empowerment of non-privileged learners who may be underrepresented in education systems or marginalized in their global context. So this is really important because a lot of things that we do openly might keep benefiting the same people who are already advantaged to begin with, who already have an education. You know, when MOOCs first came out in 2012, they realized most people who are benefiting from them were already university educated, were already in the global north, were already people who were privileged and not necessarily the people who were the poorest. All right. And now I'm going to move on to a model that I had created with Catherine Cronin and Rajiv Jangiani about categorization of open educational practices as either content-centric or process-centric. So an example of a content-centric open educational practice is when you create something that is an open textbook, or think about something like Wikipedia. All right, so Wikipedia, if what you're going to do is you're going to create Wikipedia stuff, then you focus on creating content, right? Versus something that's more process-centric would be like having an open discussion on Twitter with a hashtag or something like that. That's about the process and not creating a particular content. It's about the interaction between people. When you're doing it in a classroom context, an open educational practice can be teacher-centric or learner-centric. So if we talk about creating a book that will be freely accessible to other people, a teacher-centric practice would be for a teacher to write that book, or for a teacher to use and adapt a book that already exists. That's a teacher doing it on their own. But a learner-centric practice would be for learners themselves to collect different open educational materials and create their own textbook that they're going to use in their course, for example. And when we use open educational practice, we can use it for a pedagogical purpose or social justice purpose. So we can invite learners to create a textbook together, and they learn how to find knowledge and to evaluate the credibility of knowledge, and they are learning something related to our course, which is fine and it's really good. But sometimes we want a social justice and we want to let learners know, can you find material from different cultures and marginalized perspectives into your course, into your book, right? Because their default might be to reproduce the dominant perspective and not necessarily look for alternative perspectives. And, you know, social justice and pedagogical has many dimensions, and I'm not going to get into that right now because I'm actually thinking, I'm going to mention Nancy Fraser's framework. I don't know if any of you are familiar with her, but she talks about social justice from different dimensions. One of them is economic. Is, you know, obviously open education makes things free, so that helps. But it doesn't change the experience itself. Whereas the experience may have cultural injustice in it because it's not designed with minorities, cultural minorities in mind, and you need to recognize minorities. This would be an example of, I don't know if you all know this, but Wikipedia, for example, has more biographies of men than women. It has more biographies of North American and Europeans than people from different parts of the world, all right? And political injustice is about involving those who normally don't have access in the design process of something. We know a lot of technology was designed by people in the US, and they were not involving women and minority groups in their design. And so political injustice would be addressed if we involve more people. One of the problems with a place like Wikipedia is that a lot of the original editors were white men. And because they were white men, a lot of their processes are like that. And then you try to involve other people in, but they're coming to a table, like when you say you bring someone to the table, it's an expression in English, right? Bring someone to a table that someone else has already designed. So you're just including them, but they're not really, they don't have really a right to change something. And so what Nancy Fraser talks about is this parity of participation. Can we make sure that everybody has the right to change the system that we're designing from the beginning, you know, a diverse people being involved? All right, but I'm kind of thinking differently these days. And I want to ask if we can infuse social justice throughout our purpose, process, and people and product. And these 4 Ps remind me of the 4 Ps of marketing. If anyone here does marketing, it's very similar, but slightly different. So I'm going to just pause for a second here to see if anybody has questions, because I feel like I've been talking for a long time. I'm going to take a sip of water and see if anybody has questions. Shall I go on? And I agree with Alistair's comment in the chat that people could benefit the most from open education might not know that it exists or how to raise awareness and access. But what's interesting, Alistair, is that a lot of people see anything on the public internet and they assume that it's open and they do whatever they want with it. They don't check the license to see if the person gives you permission to use it, and they just use it. And that's totally fine, I think, as a stepping stone, until you realize, oh, I can actually adapt it, right? Okay, Kritika, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking, I mean, we are involved in a project where we are moving towards a closed LMS, right? But as we were doing that, one thing that I realized was that platform actually has a common space, which means when you are preparing be it a simple guide or be it your own full course, it allows you to put it into comments, and this comments have different levels as well. So you can do by your department, your faculty, or open to the public. So I was thinking this is something that we don't generally think, like LMS, we always associate, oh, it's closed and done, right? But there are these things that probably we need to explore more. When you were talking about content to process, this is something we'll have both taking place. But when we look at the processes, then we will also think about both content and process.
Yeah.
That's something I thought it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that your LMS has that aspect. So it just makes people think about something maybe they hadn't thought about before. During the early days of the pandemic, I found an instructor from, I think it was psychology, who said, we're all teaching the same course, just like different sections of the same course. Can we not like share the videos that we create? I'm like, of course, make each person do the video for a different chapter and share. Of course, like why should you replicate and reinvent the wheel? It's within the same institution. And I was also thinking about things like labs in science, that everybody all over the world, it's a lot of cost to keep recording experiments. Like, why don't people just have a common place where everybody uploads theirs and shares? And they're still going to have to come to class to have a discussion with the instructor and do other things, but like, why not share that? And so some places do this, and so the culture takes a while because sometimes they're like, this is mine and I want to do it my way, and I'm doing it in a different way than everybody else's. And that's why with sort of open educational resources, one of the things you can give people permission to do, you can give people permission to adapt what you've done and to adapt it for the culture. So like if you have a book that's created with a North American audience in mind, you can go in and make those edits and adapt it for a Swedish or a Singaporean audience, right? And those things are important about openness. And I don't know about the commons in Canvas that you're talking, I'm assuming you're talking about Canvas. And I'm not sure if this commons means I can just download what you've done just as it is, or is it like in a format that I can then adapt? Do you know?
You can adapt.
Adapt, and that's excellent.
That is
right?
what is good about this. So it clearly states like, you can adapt, and you can give that level of permission as to, what you want to give them and how they download and how they use.
Yeah.
I found that interesting.
Yeah, and honestly, I think it's also important that you can choose which things to make at which permission level. So for example, for my PhD thesis, anybody can download it, but I don't want them to take parts of it and publish them in a book without my permission. That's not okay. It's my thesis. I spent 7 years working on it, right? But if I just take a picture of the sky, I'm okay with people doing it. It's just the sky. We all have the sky. And just take a picture, do whatever you want with it, With my slides, as long as you say it's mine, if you reuse it, that's good because my name gets known, as long as you're saying that you got it from me. You see these different things, and then, but if I was a photographer and that's how I made my money, then I would not be okay with people using it without paying me, right? Because I'm taking really excellent photos if I'm a photographer. So yeah, thanks for that contribution, Kritika. All right, so here is me again talking about Wikipedia. Is the purpose of Wikipedia, do you think, social justice? Is social justice one of the purposes of Wikipedia? Is it central? We all know Wikipedia, right? Do we hate it? Do we like it? Nobody's answering, but I do think their intention was good, right? What do you think the intention of Wikipedia was? I think there's like twofold intention of Wikipedia, right? At least. Not representative of all societies. So I think it meant to be democratic, but it's failing to represent all societies, and it's failed at not reconstructing the white male European view. Yeah, I think so. But I think their intention was to be a democratic space. provide a way to track contributors to articles. It does kind of do that in a way. Yeah. I don't know if that's, why is that important, David? I'm not sure. Peer production of knowledge. So it does do that, right? It does do that well. It creates a space for like what it would look like to have peer production of knowledge. It's just that what happens is that there are editors there, and most of them are white males, and they can delete an article, or you can have like some apparently really aggressive conversations when people disagree on something. As well as AIs will if we aren't careful. Yeah, we need to be really careful with artificial intelligence in all kinds of ways. I agree. But it does succeed in creating a free encyclopedia, right? Do you remember before Wikipedia, the encyclopedias that were, I don't know how many books. When I was a child, we had one at home, and you know, you get these salespeople coming to your home trying to sell you the next one, and then they converted them into CD-ROMs with multimedia. And now we have Wikipedia. Nobody knows why these things existed. They were outdated like 2 years later, right? My mother-in-law is trying to get me to take a very, very old encyclopedia from the 70s. I'm like, the data in it is all wrong. Everything about it is wrong. Yeah, Wikithon, yes, Neil, definitely. Wikithons help address. Yeah, they've had feminist hackathons. They've had, for example, Wikimedia in Ghana, in Africa, they create their own editathons, and they just come together and they write biographies about African history, or they write biographies of women, and they get together, they learn how to do it well, and they do it together, and they sort of redress that injustice. All right, I'm going to move on from here. And then Open at the Margins. This is a book that I co-edited and curated with a group of other people. Yes, Wikipedia shows different perspectives. You check the same entry in different languages, you'll get different perspectives, but only if you speak the languages is the problem. I guess you can translate with Google or whatever. So Open at the Margins is a book that basically open education, just like everything else, has a few white males who first started deciding what it is. And then a lot of us who aren't white males are like, that's not what open education is to me. But the dominant white male perspective is so strong that it's so hard, like you publish one or two things and then you can't find them in the sea of whiteness. And so what we did here at Open at the Margins is that a group of us, women and Rajiv, who's of Indian origin, lives in Canada, we got together and we got articles that were not in peer-reviewed journals, but blog posts, videos, podcasts from people who had marginal perspectives, and put them all together in one place to republish them, so that if someone does want to know about the marginal perspective, they'll find it all in this one book. And so the purpose of this was to amplify the marginal perspectives that are rarely ever seen and put them all together so that someone can get all this sort of alternative epistemic perspective on what openness means in one book. And it was a good step, but of course it's not perfect because everything in it is in English, for example. We didn't include any content that is in English, and that's already a lot of things that don't get included, for example, even though between us we speak about 3 or 4 languages maybe. So that's something to keep in mind. Yeah, so that was that. And then the process of creating things, being transparent about it. The process in this was centering marginalized voices. The editors themselves are marginal in some way. And we recognize our own partiality, that we're biased in some way. We only know what we know, and it was never complete. And we're always sort of inviting people to edit the book and add new things to it. And the product itself challenges academic gatekeeping in the sense that we're choosing non-peer-reviewed articles, because we think that stuff that's peer-reviewed is already findable, right? You can find it through Google Scholar, you'll find it when you're trying to do stuff. And one of the quotes from Sarah Ahmed that we included in this Open at the Margins intro is, when we think of this question, who appears, you know, sort of we need to ask that question. And so that book is all about who are the people who don't appear and how do we make them visible, you know, who's there and who's not there. So just think about what kind of things you're thinking of doing that is open, or education in general, or social justice central. Which dimensions of social justice is your work going to address? Because there are so many different dimensions. You might address the economic, but not the cultural and political, for example. Do you want to start redressing injustice in different ways? Or this should be addressing injustice, not justice. And are you able to do it on the institutional level or just on the level of communication between people? Because solving institutional injustice is much bigger, right? Think about your process. In what ways does your process center social justice, and the ways that people are going to be working together, and how might your process reproduce oppression or create new oppressions? Can using particular platforms or tools get in the way of social justice? And I think the idea of intentional adaptation in the process is so important. Like, you need to prepare, but being present and noticing if certain people are contributing more or less is really important. And so I'm going to show you this really, really quickly. This is work by Mia Zamora and I. We were talking about the importance of equity and care working together. So if you have equity, and no care, this is probably systemic injustice. If you have equity and no care, this is where, like, an institution says they will do diversity work and they will be inclusive and equitable, but in the end, nobody's actually making it work. So it looks good on paper, but actually isn't happening in practice. And if you have people who care, but there isn't equity in how the care is distributed, you'll have something that's partial care. It's biased towards particular people, and some people have the burden and others aren't giving or getting care. So it's not a fair distribution. And then if you have equity and care, we feel like this is socially just care. And I feel like open education is also a kind of care. It's that you care that other people in the world benefit from the education that you're able to offer, you know? So I'm gonna skip these for now. And I want to introduce you to this notion of intentionally equitable hospitality. I'm going to put the link to the article in the chat. And this is a notion that my colleagues and I came up with while we were working on something called Virtually Connecting, which is meant to challenge academic gatekeeping at conferences. And the idea is these 4 questions. Before you do something, there's a pre-design phase. Who's involved in design? Who's the funder? What are their impositions? How might they privilege certain groups over others? When you say who's involved in the design, are you involving students? Are you involving marginalized groups, for example? In the design phase, when you're designing something, are you anticipating or responding to inequalities that you know about? And which oppressions does it redress? Which might it reproduce? And then when you're facilitating an experience kind of like today, can you do intentional adaptation? This is at Adrienne Marie's Brown. Is it like you plan something and then people respond in a way that you don't expect? Are there new inequalities that arise? What can you do? Can you use your authority in a generous way to sort of help redress inequalities? And then beyond the moment, how do you build inclusive and equitable communities sustainably, right? So I don't want to give you an example from my own practice. I actually want you to reflect sort of on this experience of ONL. So would someone like to share sort of like what happens at all of these phases to try to ensure that there's some level of social justice in the ways it's done? Go ahead, Elsa.
Just feel the silence there. That's a very difficult question. I think in terms of in terms of the course, we have rethought many times about the design and how we facilitate, and we're continually rethinking it, responding to evaluations from participants and contributors. But we still have a long way to go. We have a vast network in the team representing all the institutions that are involved from around the world. We try to involve previous participants becoming co-facilitators and becoming a topic responsible for topics. But yeah, it's an ongoing process, and it is so easy to forget these issues. Speaking as a white European male,
Yeah,
it's very simple. It's very easy to go on sort of tradition.
yeah, and
So
that's why this pre-design of involving the right combination of people is going to help stop you from forgetting that, right? Because each person will notice what makes sense with their own positionality and identity and context. And sometimes you can have a diverse group, but they all think with the dominant perspective because that's what they've been taught or what they're used to doing. And so that's another thing to just like think about. But I think generally starting with the right combination of people, that will be receiving, because what you have is you have someone from each institution that's contributing, right? So the audience are similar to at least one of the facilitators or designers, right?
But I think, do you mean that this is really a sort of, this is something that would go into every course design, that sort of thinking about how can you make it more inclusive? How can you use students in the design of your course, and how can you use diverse student groups? So many courses are designed for campus students, and they tend to forget the online students and their particular situation. And we assume that what is good for campus students is good for online students, and that doesn't quite make any more ideas,
true.
Please.
Yeah, at the start of the, when we started conversations, you're talking about the HyFlix and the hybrid models, and how sometimes we tend to force it on people, like not thinking about the entire group, particularly both the learners as well as the teachers. I mean, it is difficult for both. And when students, when you want to ask them to participate in conversations, in discussions, how do they do it, right? Then for the teachers, whom should my focus be on? Should I focus on the online group? Should I focus on the in-person group? How do I make it fair to everyone? So this conversation keeps coming quite often, right? Particularly with the HyFlix. And there was a very nice article about HyFlix and how it should be gone recently. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think Maha, you're an expert on liberating structures, and that's our easy practices that everybody could use, and even in the ONL course. So that would be something to share with everybody.
I'm just gonna do one right now.
All right, good.
This is so perfect. But
Yeah.
I also like what Neil wrote here about the anti-curriculum, and so that's also really interesting, and being emergent sometimes. And I actually skipped some slides to do the liberating structure, but just in perfect time with you. I'm going to do a very quick liberating structure. If you haven't heard of these, I'm going to put the link in the chat. These are ways of structuring conversations to ensure a little bit more equitable contribution from everyone. And TRIZ is my favorite one. Nobody wants to use Russian words, I think, anymore, so I'm not going to spell it out in Russian. But TRIZ just means working backwards to solve a problem, really. It's a creative way. So if our goal is to create open education projects that challenge, resist, or redress social injustice, we'll convert this to an anti-goal, all right? So our anti-goal is, how do we design, think about education in general, but we're talking about open education, so that it reproduces oppression and inequity, so that it creates less fairness in the world, right? So I'm going to give you a minute to think about this on your own. I'm going to type the question in the chat, so you can just keep it in mind and take it with you to the breakout rooms. Stop sharing. And this is the question that I want you to think about. How can we design an open education project so that it reproduces oppression and inequity? I'll give you a few seconds to think about it here. I know we have 10 minutes left, Alistair, I'm very aware. I'm going to send people out for 5 minutes to talk about it, or maybe less than 5 minutes, but just put them in smaller groups. Okay. Yep, okay. I'm going to send you out in groups of 2 or 3. For 3 minutes, I think, since there are only 2 or 3 of you, to just share some of the things that you think about. If I wanted to create something oppressive, what would I do? All right. 3 minutes, and only a 15-second countdown, so you can come here very quickly. I'll see you back here in a few minutes. Alistair, have I used TRIZ here before? Oh, you're muted.
No, it's new for me. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay. Your voice is not good though.
I was a little worried. Maybe you didn't.
Yeah. No, I was aware.
You were aware. Okay, I sort of thought,
Yeah,
oh goodness, do I have? And I want. Yeah. Anyway,
No,
fine.
no.
All fine.
I
all fine.
already skipped a couple of slides.
Yep. All fine.
It's very funny about Marcus. I'm like, his name is familiar. I must have seen him in one of the.
Oh, he's been in. Yeah, he recognized. He's been in one of some of your sessions. liberating structures and so on.
Mhm.
Sergey has disappeared again. Okay.
Oh, okay. I'm just trying to make sure there's nobody alone in a breakout room, but there isn't. We're good.
I think we're okay.
Mhm.
Some are just too. Yeah. Yes, it's sort of reverse design by. I don't know how I would tackle that.
Yeah, like what would
Yeah.
you do if your intention was to do
Yeah.
something inequitable, right?
There's plenty of people do that sort of thing, but
I know. Like you
yeah.
look at it and you say, how did you miss that? But I think it's a useful way of looking at things, because
Yeah.
if you look at what do you do, like if you create a checklist of making it perfect, it feels overwhelming.
Yeah, I read there was a lovely study. A person who did they tackled plagiarism with students by writing a plausible article, but it was riddled with examples of bad quotations and plagiarism. And their task was to be sort of plagiarism detectives and identify the problems.
Nice.
And
That's
by
nice.
doing
I
that,
like
they
that.
managed to increase awareness in a way that a sort of traditional lecture on plagiarism would not have done. So they.
Hi, Augusto.
And my internet crashed when
Ah.
I was
No
in the
problem.
breakout room.
Everybody is coming back soon.
Yeah.
Okay, and I was there yesterday.
Just hold on a minute.
Yeah.
So we were just talking about how can you design something that intentionally reproduces oppression and inequity. I think for me, one of the key things is just create it on your own. Don't involve anybody else in the process.
It's so easy to fall in. I think a lot of the time you do it unintentionally and then realize
Yeah.
later how wrong you were.
Yeah. There's an element that Tima Okun calls this like sense of urgency. And sometimes you create a fake sense of urgency, and that's kind of a white supremacist. It's not really white supremacist, like it's just bad management, I guess. But she calls it a white supremacist thing. It's like you think, oh, I have to do it now because it has to get done. But really, no, you could have waited a few more days to involve more people. Like it's worthwhile to wait.
They all roll back.
Yeah.
That was short and sweet.
Welcome back, everybody. Feel free to share in the chat some of the things that came out for you in the breakout rooms, things that would, feel free to share that while I share my screen and ask you a few more questions. Just need to find my slides again. My slides are here. All right. So what, as you share stuff in the chat about how would you do it on purpose, sometimes think about real projects that you're involved in and what elements of what people have said actually do happen, or something resembles it. Because sometimes you don't do the exact same awful thing, but you see something similar to it happening all the time. It's familiar, right? Just invite Vikings to design phase. I guess that's white men. Just do it in English. Yes, just do it in one language for sure. Assume there's only one perspective. Yeah. What else? Not allow participation, just input from one person. Charge a lot for a little. Yes, see, only one view, all of those. How much do we see that actually does that? Quite a lot. I was just in a workshop about gender equity, and it was very broadcast oriented, and then they wanted people to participate in the second hour. I'm like, you don't do that. You don't start by something like that and then ask people to participate. And then think about what changes can you make to your own practices to make sure that you avoid these things. Yeah, making sure nobody feels excluded, whether it's subtle or large. Only using one technology, requiring login can get in the way of that, definitely. Never follow these, you're saying VARC, but I would say universal design for learning that allows for different ways of learning. Multicultural, yeah, not having multicultural view, yes. Paywall, definitely. Adding diversity and using Swedish in comments. Oh, some people are doing that in this course, are they? Okay, and what kind of support do you need or for your team to do better on this? Because sometimes it's something you can switch on and off, and sometimes you just need more people to think through something. So I just want to say that openness is not inherently good. There are situations where it can be useful to be closed, where you need to be private and have a good conversation, and can be particularly harmful, actually. All right. I'm just reminding you of these community building resources and how we created them intentionally, equitable hospitality. So it's a resource that people can keep using. And I'm just going to skip this for now because we're running out of time. And this is another liberating structure in development called spiral journal, which I'd love to do with you. It's going to help you sort of reflect on this session. This is where you need a pen and a paper, and it's going to be very quick. Usually I would give you more time to do it, but if you have a pen and paper, this is a very tiny one, but can you do this so that you end up with a place in the middle? If you can't take it out, just draw lines so that you have a dot in the middle here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a spiral very slowly. I'm just going to show you how I'm doing it, and then you do your own, but just very slowly. Don't take your pen off the paper. Just put your eyes off the screen for a few minutes. I'll play some music for you. And then when I stop the music, you stop drawing the spiral, okay? Okay, usually I'd give you more time, but we don't have a lot of time. So I'm just going to move to the next point. And so we're going to fill out the spiral by answering questions in the quadrants, right? So at the top left, just write down a word or phrase. Right now, I feel. And then in the next quadrant, I joined this session in order to. One thing I will do differently after this is. And finally, I still need help with. And you can keep this spiral journal for yourself to use it to help you reflect on the session, write a blog post about it, do whatever you want with it. But for now, I'd love it if you shared one thing from your spiral journal with me now in the chat. And what you're hearing now is just the call for prayer here. So add diversity, something you're going to do. Right. Oh, and by the way, here's again the link to the slides, my email if you want to ask me anything later. And this link, if you want to give me feedback, I like to get feedback on my notes. And my daughter helped me design these slides. So I always recognize what she's helped me with so that I don't do the cupcake phenomenon again. All right, let me know in the chat one thing before you leave. It's exactly time. So I know a lot of you are going to have to run. Use opposite questions. Yeah, it's called Triz. Yeah, right now I feel confused. I'm sorry. Sometimes confusion is a good step towards learning. Think more about types of injustice. Right now I feel curious. Yeah. You know, I was reading something recently about this cycle of confusion, from confusion to curiosity to joy. When you learn something, this is an interesting combination. Feeling challenged. Yeah. I hope the challenge is a motivation for learning and curiosity. And that you don't feel sort of frustrated because you're gonna keep the cupcake story. Okay, thanks. Feeling inspired and supported. The intent of drawing the spiral. People ask me this question all the time. How did you feel drawing the spiral? Some people just really like it. They feel it centers them and focuses them. And I heard that it has some spiritual connotations. It doesn't have those connotations in my culture. Meditative, Lotta said. Yeah, some people say that. More needs to be done to be more inclusive. I agree. Much easier to reproduce inequity and oppression. Yeah, than oppose them and counter them. I agree for Zana. Your ink was running out these days. I hardly use pens. I use pencils more. Stuck. How do you feel stuck? Develop more liberating structure ideas for NL courses. Happy to think of some strength with that? Yes, Marcus, I'm very happy to work with you on this. Definitely happy to work with you on this. I'm actually planning some summer professional development on liberating structures and building communities. So I mean, anybody here is welcome to, I'll let Alistair and Ritka and Lotta know about this so that they can include it in the course if you guys are still working in the summer. We're calling it Mid-Year Fest because some people are in the Southern Hemisphere and it's not summer for them. Use free source tools for teaching. All right. Yes, Marcus, please stay in touch and let's do this. In case you don't have my email, this is my email. You can keep going on this. Thank you. All right, I do want to let you guys go because it's 2 minutes past, but I can stay for 5 more minutes or 10 more minutes to discuss anything with anyone who wants to.
Okay, I'll just wrap up the recording anyway by saying thank you to Maha for another very inspirational session and an awful lot of questions in our heads. Good luck with your PBL group on this topic. And a reminder that next Wednesday at the same time, 11 o'clock Central European Summer Time, we'll have a discussion webinar and give you a chance to work in between the different PBL groups, as Kiruthika said. So you'll get more time to discuss this and also compare notes. How is the PBL work going, and discuss with members of other groups and maybe get some ideas together. So we'll see you this time next week. Otherwise, hang around and Maha will take any extra questions, but you're free to go now and I will stop the recording.